I thought I had the perfect marriage. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and for 5 years I lived in what everyone called the Anderson family mansion, a stunning $4.2 million estate with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded my makeshift art studio with natural light. My husband Michael would always joke that I was living the dream, and honestly, I believed him. Every morning I'd wake up in our king-sized bed, kiss Michael goodbye as he headed to his corporate job, and then disappear into what used to be the mansion's library. I'd transformed it into my art studio, where canvases lined the walls and paint tubes cluttered every surface. Michael's mother, Patricia Anderson, would often walk by and make her little comments. "Still playing with paints, I see," she'd say with that tight smile of hers. "When are you planning to contribute something real to this family?" At first, I laughed it off. Patricia had always been protective of her precious son, and I figured she just needed time to warm up to me. But as months turned into years, those comments became sharper, more frequent. During family dinners, she'd introduce me to guests as Michael's wife, the one with the art hobby. The word hobby always stung, especially when she'd emphasize it like it was some kind of dirty secret. Michael never corrected her. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the dynamic. "Mom's just practical," he'd tell me later. "You know how she is about money. Maybe if your art actually sold, she'd take it more seriously." But here's what nobody knew. My art was selling. For the past 3 years, I'd been working with a small gallery downtown, selling pieces under a pseudonym. Nothing huge, just enough to make me feel like my work had value. The gallery owner, Sarah Chen, had become more than just a business partner. She was the only person who truly understood my talent. "Rebecca, your work speaks to people," she'd tell me during our monthly meetings. "You have something special here." I never told Michael about the sales. Something about the way his family treated my art made me want to keep this small victory to myself. Maybe I was being petty, but after years of being called a dreamer, a burden, someone who didn't contribute, I wanted to hold on to this one thing that was purely mine. The first real crack in my perfect life appeared during a dinner party last spring. Patricia had invited her entire social circle, 20 of Greenwich's finest, all gathered around our massive dining table. The conversation had turned to careers, as it always did in Patricia's circle. Mrs. Wellington, the wife of some hedge fund manager, was going on about her daughter's promotion at Goldman Sachs. "And what about you, dear?" Mrs. Wellington had asked me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Are you still creating?" Before I could answer, Patricia jumped in. "Oh, Rebecca's still playing artist. We keep hoping she'll grow out of it and find something more substantial." The table went quiet for a moment, that uncomfortable silence that happens when someone crosses a line in public. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand, but instead of defending me, he said, "Well, we can't all be as practical as Mom." He said it with a laugh, like my dreams were some endearing character flaw he had to tolerate. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and realized something had shifted. The comments weren't just thoughtless anymore. They were calculated. Patricia wasn't just being difficult. She was systematically undermining my confidence, my place in the family, my sense of worth. And Michael? He wasn't just failing to defend me. He was actively participating. I started paying closer attention after that. During breakfast, Patricia would casually mention articles about the financial strain of supporting unemployed spouses. When I'd spend money on art supplies, Michael would sigh dramatically and make comments about our budget. Never mind that I'd been contributing to household expenses from my secret gallery sales for 3 years. The gaslighting was subtle but constant. When I'd get excited about a new piece I was working on, Michael would nod along but then immediately change the subject to something more important. His work, his mother's latest social event, anything but my art. When I suggested having friends over to see my work, Patricia would suddenly need the house for one of her charity committees. "You're being too sensitive," Michael would say whenever I brought up how isolated I felt. "Mom doesn't mean anything by it. You know she loves you." But love doesn't feel like being erased. Love doesn't feel like having your dreams treated as inconveniences. Love doesn't feel like being introduced as someone's artistic wife with air quotes around the word artistic. The breaking point should have come months earlier, but I was still holding on to the fantasy that things would change. That maybe if I proved myself, if I became successful enough, if I just tried harder to fit into their world, I'd finally earn their respect. Instead, I started documenting everything, not consciously at first, just keeping track of the comments, the eye rolls, the casual cruelties. I'd write them down in a small notebook I kept hidden in my art supplies. Patricia told Mrs. Chin that I still haven't found my calling while I was standing right there. Michael laughed when his brother David asked if I was planning to get serious about life anytime soon. The notebook filled up quickly, page after page of small humiliations, of being made to feel like a burden, like a child who refused to grow up. Reading through it later, I was shocked by the pattern. This wasn't random thoughtlessness. This was systematic emotional abuse disguised as concern for my future. But the real revelation came when I was organizing Michael's desk one afternoon, looking for a charger he'd asked me to find. Tucked between some work documents, I found a folder labeled Financial Planning. Inside were bank statements, investment portfolios, and property documents I'd never seen before. According to these papers, Michael's successful corporate salary was actually quite modest. The mansion, the luxury cars, the expensive vacations, none of it was coming from his income. In fact, his salary barely covered his student loans and credit card debt. My hands shook as I kept reading. There were references to R. Martinez Trust Fund and Estate Inheritance Management, phone numbers for estate lawyers I'd never heard of. And then, buried in the back of the folder, I found a copy of the mansion's deed. Rebecca Martinez, owner. Not Michael Anderson. Not Patricia Anderson. Me. Suddenly, fragments of memories started clicking into place. My grandmother's funeral 5 years ago, right after Michael and I got engaged. The lawyer who'd tried to speak with me privately, but Michael had insisted on being present for support. The documents I'd signed without really reading, trusting Michael to handle the complicated legal stuff while I grieved. I'd inherited everything. The mansion, the investments, the trust fund that had been quietly generating income for years. And somehow, Michael had positioned himself as the manager of it all while making me feel like I was living off his generosity. That evening, I sat in my studio, staring at a half-finished painting of a woman breaking free from golden chains. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, creating art about liberation while living as a prisoner in my own house. A house that was actually mine. I needed to know more. Over the next several weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I scheduled appointments with the estate lawyer whose name I'd found in Michael's files, claiming I wanted to better understand my grandmother's legacy. I met with the trust manager to review the account statements I'd apparently been receiving but never seen. The truth was staggering. My grandmother hadn't just left me the mansion, she'd left me a fortune. The trust fund was worth over $3 million, generating substantial monthly income that had been quietly accumulating for 5 years. The mansion was completely paid off, worth $4.2 million in the current market. I owned 2 rental properties in the city that I didn't even know existed. I wasn't the struggling artist living off my husband's generosity. I was a millionaire being manipulated into believing I was a burden, but the cruelest discovery was yet to come. During my meeting with Sarah Chin at the gallery, she casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I'm so glad you finally told your husband about our partnership," she said, refilling my coffee cup. "He seemed so proud when he called last week." My heart stopped. "He called you?" "Yes, asking about your sales figures for the year. He said you were thinking about expanding your work with us but wanted to understand the numbers better." I told him how well you've been doing, over $200,000 in sales over the past 3 years. He seemed thrilled. Michael knew. He'd known all along that my art was successful, that I was making real money, that I had talent worth celebrating, and he'd chosen to let his family mock me anyway. He'd chosen to participate in making me feel worthless while secretly benefiting from my success. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband. This man who'd spent 5 years gaslighting me about my own life, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to demand explanations or beg for respect. I was going to be strategic. I started preparing quietly, methodically. I opened my own bank accounts and began redirecting my gallery payments. I consulted with a divorce attorney, not to file papers yet, but to understand my rights and options. I documented every instance of emotional abuse, every financial manipulation, every lie I could prove. Most importantly, I started preparing for the moment when Michael and his family would inevitably push too far. Because people like them always do. They get comfortable with their cruelty, confident in their control, and then they overreach. I didn't have to wait long. Thanksgiving was always a production at the Anderson house. Patricia insisted on hosting the entire extended family plus friends. Usually, about 20 people gathered around the massive dining table that had supposedly been in their family for generations. In reality, it was my dining table, in my house, paid for with my money. This year, I'd decided to bring something special. I'd been working on a series of paintings about resilience, about women reclaiming their power. The centerpiece was a large canvas depicting a phoenix rising from ashes, her wings spread wide, her expression fierce and triumphant. I'd planned to gift it to the family, a gesture of gratitude for welcoming me into their home. The morning of Thanksgiving, I carefully wrapped the painting and carried it downstairs. Michael was in the kitchen with Patricia, discussing seating arrangements for dinner. "Where should I put this for now?" I asked, indicating the wrapped canvas. Patricia barely glanced over. "What is it?" "A painting I finished. I thought I'd give it to the family today." Michael and Patricia exchanged one of their looks, the kind I'd become expert at reading over the years. It was a mix of exasperation and amusement, like I was a child who'd brought home a drawing from school. "That's sweet," Michael said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "Just put it somewhere out of the way for now. We'll deal with it later." Deal with it. Like my art was something to be managed, contained, disposed of when convenient. The guests began arriving around too. The usual crowd, Patricia's society friends, Michael's siblings and their spouses, a few neighbors who'd been coming to these gatherings for years. I played my role perfectly, the gracious hostess in someone else's home, deflecting questions about my little art projects and steering conversations toward safer topics. Dinner went smoothly until dessert was served. That's when Patricia decided it was time for the traditional gratitude-sharing portion of the evening. Each person around the table was supposed to share something they were thankful for that year. When it came to Michael's turn, he stood up with his wine glass, looking around the table with that confident smile I'd once found charming. "I'm grateful for this beautiful home," he began, gesturing around the dining room, "for the stability my family has built, and for the opportunity to share it with someone I love, even when that person is still figuring herself out." A few people chuckled. I felt my face burn, but I kept my expression neutral. "Speaking of figuring things out," Patricia added, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant trouble. "Rebecca, why don't you tell everyone about your latest artistic endeavor? I'm sure they'd love to hear about your paintings." All eyes turned to me. I could feel the anticipation in the room, not the good kind, but the kind that comes before a public execution. Patricia's friends were watching with barely concealed amusement, waiting for the entertainment to begin. "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, "I brought something to show everyone." I walked to the corner where I'd placed the wrapped painting. "I finished this piece recently, and I thought tonight would be perfect for sharing it." I carefully unwrapped the canvas and turned it toward the room. For a moment there was silence as people took in the image, the powerful phoenix, wings spread against a backdrop of flames and darkness, rising triumphant into golden light. Then David, Michael's older brother, started laughing. "Jesus, Becca, that's pretty intense for a dining room." "It's very dramatic," added Mrs. Wellington, Patricia's closest friend. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a compliment. Patricia stepped closer to examine the painting, her expression shifting from polite interest to something harder. "Well, it's certainly ambitious. Though I have to ask, dear, when are you planning to move beyond this artistic phase and focus on something more practical?" The room went quiet. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for all year, The moment when their casual cruelty would finally cross the line into something unforgivable. I mean, Patricia continued, gaining confidence from the audience, we've all been very supportive of your hobby for years now. But at some point, don't you think it's time to contribute something real to this family? Something that actually helps build our future instead of just decorating walls? A few nervous laughs echoed around the table. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend me, or at least ask his mother to stop. Instead, he was nodding along, as if Patricia was making perfect sense. Mom has a point, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. I mean, it's great that you enjoy painting, Becca, but we can't live on artwork forever. Maybe it's time to think about what comes next. Mrs. Wellington leaned forward. Have you considered teaching? Art therapy, perhaps? Something where you could use your interests in a more practical way? They were tag-teaming me now, each comment building on the last, creating a crescendo of humiliation. I stood there holding my painting. Hours of work, months of emotion, years of suppressed dreams made manifest, while these people dismissed it as decorative nonsense. But I didn't break. Instead, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. These people had just shown me exactly who they were, in front of 20 witnesses. They'd revealed their complete lack of respect for me, their total dismissal of my dreams, their casual cruelty disguised as concern. You know what? I said quietly, wrapping the painting back up. You're absolutely right. It is time to think about what comes next. I was heading back toward the corner to put the painting away when Michael stood up again. For a moment, I thought he was going to apologize, to salvage the situation somehow. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. Actually, he said, his voice carrying a strange note of finality, since we're talking about practical decisions and moving forward, there's something I need to give you. The room went completely silent. Even Patricia looked confused by this unexpected development. Michael walked around the table to where I stood and handed me the envelope. I think it's time we both admitted this isn't working, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We want different things. You want to live in some artistic fantasy, and I need someone who's ready for real life. My hands shook slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out, already signed by Michael. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and requested an equitable division of marital assets. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Someone gasped. Mrs. Wellington actually grabbed her husband's arm, but all I could focus on was the legal document in my hands, the final, ultimate dismissal of our entire relationship, served to me like dessert in front of our Thanksgiving guests. Michael! Patricia's voice cut through the chaos. Even she seemed stunned by the public nature of his announcement. But Michael wasn't finished. He was looking around the room now, playing to his audience, making sure everyone understood his narrative. I've been supporting Rebecca's art dreams for 5 years, he said, his voice gaining strength. I've given her a beautiful home, complete financial security, everything she could want. And what do I get in return? Paintings, fantasies, a wife who thinks making pretty pictures is more important than building a real future together. He gestured toward the wrapped canvas I was still holding. This painting here? It probably took her 50 hours to complete. 50 hours that could have been spent on job applications, on building real skills, on contributing something meaningful to our partnership. Instead, she's in that room every day, playing with paints like a child who refuses to grow up. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not just the divorce papers, though serving those in front of guests was calculated humiliation, but the complete rewriting of our relationship. In Michael's version, he was the generous provider, and I was the ungrateful burden. He was practical and mature while I was a delusional child, and his audience was buying it. I could see it in their faces, the nods of understanding, the sympathetic looks directed at Michael, the slight shifting away from me as if failure might be contagious. You called my art a joke, I said quietly, my voice barely carrying across the room. Because it is a joke, Patricia burst out, apparently deciding this was her moment to speak freely. You've been living in our house, eating our food, enjoying our lifestyle for 5 years while contributing nothing but canvas and paint. My son has been carrying this entire family financially while you play pretend in that studio. Our house, our food, our lifestyle. The pronouns hit me like physical blows. In their minds, I had never been an equal partner, never been family. I had been a charity case they'd grown tired of supporting. David chimed in with a laugh that sounded forced. Come on, Becca, you have to admit Mom has a point. When's the last time you sold a painting? When's the last time your art actually paid for anything around here? 20 pairs of eyes were staring at me now, waiting for my response. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed uncomfortable with the public nature of this confrontation, but most were simply curious about how this drama would unfold. I looked down at the divorce papers again, then at my wrapped painting, then at the faces around the table. These people had just handed me the perfect gift, not the divorce papers, but the complete, undeniable display of their true feelings about me. Thank you, I said, surprising everyone, including myself, with how calm my voice sounded. Thank you for making this so clear. I set the painting down and walked toward the stairs. I'll just go pack a few things. Rebecca, wait, Michael called after me, but I was already halfway up the stairs. I heard him say something to the guests about taking a moment to process, heard Patricia offering coffee and trying to smooth over the awkwardness. But I wasn't going upstairs to cry or pack. I was going to get the documents I'd been preparing for months, the documents that would turn this entire evening on its head. 20 minutes later, I walked back down the stairs carrying a small suitcase and a leather portfolio. The guests were still there, though many looked uncomfortable and ready to leave. Someone had cleared away the dessert plates, and several people were standing in small groups, whispering among themselves. Michael was in the living room with his parents and David, probably planning how to handle the aftermath of his public divorce announcement. They looked up when I entered, and Michael actually had the audacity to look concerned. Becca, I know this was difficult, but I think once you've had time to think about it, you'll realize this is best for both of us, he said. We can work out the details privately. You don't have to leave tonight. Actually, I said, opening my portfolio, before I go, there are a few things we should clarify, especially since you made this such a public affair. I pulled out the first document, a copy of the mansion's deed, and handed it to Michael. His confident expression faltered as he read his name nowhere on the paper. What is this? He asked. That's the deed to this house. The house you've been telling everyone you're generously letting me live in. I pulled out another document. And this is the trust fund statement showing the $3.2 million I inherited from my grandmother. The trust fund you've been managing without my knowledge for 5 years. The room went dead silent. Patricia grabbed the deed from Michael's hands, her face going pale as she read. This has to be a mistake, she said. I pulled out a third document. Bank statements showing the monthly income from my inheritance that's been depositing into an account Michael set up. An account I didn't know existed until 3 weeks ago. I looked around the room at the shocked faces. The same inheritance that's been paying the taxes on this house, the utilities, the maintenance, and most of your son's living expenses for our entire marriage. Mrs. Wellington's mouth actually fell open. David was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. And this, I said, pulling out the final document with a flourish, is the eviction notice I filed this morning. You have 30 days to vacate my property. The silence that followed was deafening. Then everyone started talking at once. Patricia was demanding explanations. David was asking if this was some kind of joke, and Mrs. Wellington was whispering urgently to her husband about what they'd just witnessed. But I wasn't finished. Oh, and Michael, I said, raising my voice over the chaos. About my art being worthless? About my paintings never paying for anything? I pulled out one final document, a gallery sales report. I've sold over $200,000 worth of artwork in the past 3 years. Sarah Chen from the gallery told me you called her last week asking about my sales figures, so you've known all along that my joke of an art career has been quite successful. I looked around the room at 20 stunned faces. You served me divorce papers and called my art worthless in front of all these people. But the truth is, my artwork has been supporting this entire household while you've been taking credit for my inheritance. I closed the portfolio and picked up my suitcase. The locks will be changed tomorrow morning. Any personal belongings you want to retrieve need to be coordinated through my attorney. Her card is attached to the eviction notice. I headed toward the door, then paused and looked back at the assembled crowd. And to answer your question, Patricia, I have been contributing something real to this family. I've been contributing everything. The house you're sitting in, the lifestyle you've been enjoying, the financial security you've been taking for granted. It's all been coming from the woman whose dreams you just spent the evening mocking. I opened the front door of my mansion and stepped into the crisp November air. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices, the demands for explanations, the sound of chairs scraping as people stood up. But I was already walking toward my car, toward my new life, toward a future where no one would ever again mistake my kindness for weakness or my dreams for delusions. The best part? Tomorrow morning, when I changed those locks, Michael and his family would finally understand what it felt like to have nowhere to go. They'd served me divorce papers, thinking they were discarding dead weight. Instead, they'd just handed me my freedom. The phone call started at 6 a.m. the next morning. Michael's ringtone pierced through my peaceful sleep in the downtown hotel suite I'd booked for the night. I let it go to voicemail. Then Patricia called, then David, then Michael again. I made myself a cup of coffee and listened to the messages while watching the sunrise through floor-to-ceiling windows that reminded me of my studio, except these belonged to a space I was paying for with my own money, honestly earned. "Rebecca, this is insane," Michael's voice crackled through the speaker. "We need to talk. There has to be some explanation for those documents. Call me back." Patricia's message was more direct. "Young lady, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this family will not be manipulated. We demand an explanation immediately." David's voicemail was the most telling. "Becca, come on. Even if you technically own the house, you can't just kick us out. We're family. We can work something out." Even if I technically own the house. Even after seeing the deed, the trust documents, the bank statements, they still couldn't fully accept that I wasn't the charity case they'd been supporting. The cognitive dissonance was almost funny. I deleted all the messages and called my attorney, Jennifer Walsh. I'd been working with her for the past month, preparing for exactly this moment. "How did it go?" she asked when she picked up. "Better than I expected. They showed their true colors in front of 20 witnesses, and I delivered the eviction notice exactly as we discussed." "Any attempts at reconciliation yet?" I laughed, thinking of the voicemails. Nothing that acknowledges reality. They're still operating under the assumption that I'm somehow bluffing or that this is all a misunderstanding. Good. That means they haven't consulted an attorney yet. We'll use that to our advantage. I'll have the process server deliver the formal divorce response today, along with our counter-petition. Jennifer and I had spent weeks preparing my response to Michael's divorce filing. While he was requesting equitable division of marital assets, my counter-petition told a very different story. I was seeking full ownership of all premarital assets, which was legally mine anyway, reimbursement for 5 years of misappropriated trust fund income, and damages for financial fraud. "What about the house?" I asked. "Locksmith arrives at 10 a.m. I'll be there to supervise and ensure everything is documented properly. The eviction notice is legally sound. As the sole owner of the property, you have every right to terminate their occupancy." After hanging up with Jennifer, I drove to the mansion, my mansion, to oversee the lock change. I arrived to find Michael's BMW still in the driveway, along with Patricia's Mercedes. Apparently, they'd decided to camp out and wait for me to come to my senses. Michael came rushing out the front door as soon as he saw my car. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled from the night before. "Rebecca, thank God," he said, approaching my car. "We need to talk about this misunderstanding." I stepped out calmly, my phone recording everything as Jennifer had instructed. "There's no misunderstanding, Michael. You served me divorce papers in front of 20 people and called my life's work a joke. I'm simply responding accordingly. But the house? The money? Where did all this come from?" The fact that he was still playing dumb was almost insulting. "You know exactly where it came from. You've been managing my inheritance for 5 years. You set up the bank accounts, handled the paperwork, made sure I never saw the statements. The only thing you didn't count on was me eventually figuring it out." Patricia appeared in the doorway and she was furious. "This is ridiculous. We've been caring for you, supporting you, giving you a home." "With my own money," I interrupted. "You've been supporting me with my own inheritance while making me feel grateful for the privilege." The locksmith's van pulled into the driveway, cutting off Patricia's response. I walked over to meet him, leaving Michael and Patricia to process what was happening. "Ms. Martinez, I'm here to change the locks on the property." "Perfect timing," I said, loud enough for Michael and Patricia to hear. "All the exterior doors, plus I'll need new keys for the garage and security system reset." "Wait, you can't do this!" Michael rushed over. "We live here!" The locksmith looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama. I handed him a copy of the property deed and the eviction notice. "I'm the sole owner of this property," I explained calmly. "These individuals have been given legal notice to vacate within 30 days. I'm within my rights to secure my property." Michael's face went through several color changes as the reality sank in. "This is crazy, Rebecca. We're married. You can't just lock me out of our home. First, you served me divorce papers last night, so apparently we're not going to be married much longer. Second, it was never our home. It's my home. It's always been my home. You just convinced me otherwise." Patricia was now standing beside Michael, her face a mask of indignation. "Young lady, I don't care what those papers say. We have rights. We've been living here for years." "As my guests," I said simply. "And now you're being asked to leave." The locksmith started working on the front door while I supervised. With each turn of his drill, I could see Michael's desperation growing. This wasn't how he'd imagined his power play working out. "Look," he said, switching tactics, "maybe we were too harsh last night. Thanksgiving dinners can get emotional. We can work this out. You don't have to blow up our entire life over one argument." "One argument?" I turned to face him fully. "Michael, you and your family have spent 5 years systematically undermining my confidence, dismissing my dreams, and making me feel like a burden. Last night wasn't one argument. It was the culmination of years of emotional abuse." "Emotional abuse?" Patricia scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. We were trying to help you become more practical. By calling my successful art career a joke? By making me feel grateful for living in my own house? By lying to me about my own financial situation for years?" I shook my head. "That's not help. That's manipulation." David's car pulled up just as the locksmith finished the front door. Michael's brother climbed out looking like he'd come to mediate, but his expression shifted when he saw what was happening. "Jesus, Becca, you're actually doing this?" "Hello, David. Yes, I'm actually exercising my legal rights as the property owner." "Shocking, I know." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that reminded me painfully of Michael. "Look, I know we all said some things last night that maybe we shouldn't have." "You mean when you laughed at my art and suggested I needed to grow up?" "Okay, that was insensitive. But come on, you're family. We can figure this out without lawyers and eviction notices." The word family hit me like a slap. "David, your family spent last night publicly humiliating me and serving me divorce papers in front of dinner guests. You don't get to play the family card now that you realize I hold all the financial power." My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Process server is en route with divorce response. Should arrive within the hour." Perfect timing. "There's actually something else you all need to know," I said, addressing the three of them. "I filed a response to Michael's divorce petition this morning. My attorney will be serving you with papers shortly." Michael's face went pale. "What kind of response?" "The kind that seeks reimbursement for 5 years of financial fraud, plus damages for emotional distress. See, while you were planning your little Thanksgiving ambush, I was documenting everything. The bank statements you hid from me, the trust fund income you diverted, the gallery sales you knew about but let your family mock anyway." Patricia grabbed Michael's arm. "What is she talking about? What gallery sales?" For the first time, Michael looked genuinely panicked. "Mom, I can explain." "Oh, Please do explain, I said sweetly. Tell your mother how you've known for months that my worthless art has been generating six-figure annual income. Tell her how you called my gallery to get sales figures while still allowing her to call my work a joke. The look Patricia gave Michael could have melted steel. You knew? You knew she was making money and you let me. It wasn't that much money, Michael said desperately. And it's not consistent. Art sales are unpredictable. $200,000 over 3 years is pretty consistent, I interrupted, especially compared to your salary, which, according to the financial records I've seen, barely covers your student loans and credit card debt. David was staring at his brother like he'd never seen him before. Mike, what the hell have you been doing? Before Michael could answer, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. The process server had arrived. Michael Anderson? The man approached with a manila envelope. That depends, Michael said warily. Court documents regarding Martinez versus Anderson. You've been served. Michael took the envelope with shaking hands. I watched his face as he read through my counter petition, the demands for reimbursement, the detailed accounting of misappropriated funds, the request for damages. Rebecca, this is... He looked up at me with something like fear in his eyes. This is asking for millions of dollars. That's what happens when you commit fraud against someone for 5 years, I said matter-of-factly. The damages add up. Patricia snatched the papers from Michael's hands, her eyes scanning the legal language. This is outrageous! We're not paying you a penny. Actually, Patricia, the we in this situation is just Michael. You see, when spouses defraud each other, it becomes a matter for family court. And family court tends to take a dim view of husbands who hide assets from their wives while emotionally abusing them. The locksmith finished with the last door and approached me with a set of new keys. All done, Ms. Martinez. New locks on all exterior doors, garage, and I've reset the security system to your specifications. Thank you. I handed him a generous tip and turned back to my soon-to-be ex-family. You have until 5 p.m. today to collect essential personal items. After that, any belongings remaining in the house will be considered abandoned property. You can't do this, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction now. A judge will never uphold this. We'll fight it. With what money? I asked. Your modest salary that barely covers your existing debts? Good luck affording a legal team that can match mine. It was harsh, but it was also true. Michael had gotten comfortable living off my inheritance while pretending to be the breadwinner. Without access to my money, he couldn't afford the kind of legal representation that could challenge my position. Mom, we need to call our lawyer, David said urgently. With what money? Patricia echoed my words, the reality starting to sink in. If what she's saying is true, if Michael has been managing her money all this time, I've been protecting our interests. Michael burst out. Do you think she would have made smart financial decisions on her own? She would have spent it all on art supplies and gallery fees. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Patricia looked shocked by his blatant confession to financial manipulation. There it is, I said quietly. The truth. You stole my inheritance because you didn't trust me to manage my own money. You made me feel like a failure while living off my success. And you convinced your family to participate in emotionally abusing me because it was easier than treating me like an equal. My phone rang. Sarah Chin from the gallery. Rebecca, I just heard from a reporter about some kind of confrontation at your house yesterday. Are you okay? A reporter? I glanced around and noticed a van parked across the street that hadn't been there earlier. Someone at the Thanksgiving dinner had apparently decided this story was too good to keep private. I'm fine, Sarah. Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm finally free to be honest about my success. What do you mean? I mean I don't have to hide my art sales anymore. I don't have to pretend my work isn't valuable. And I definitely don't have to listen to anyone call my career a joke ever again. I could hear the excitement in Sarah's voice. Does this mean you're ready to do that feature exhibition we discussed? The one about women reclaiming their power? Sarah, I think that exhibition just became a lot more relevant. Let's schedule a meeting for this afternoon. After hanging up, I found Michael, Patricia, and David huddled together by their cars, clearly strategizing. The process server was gone, the locksmith had left, and now it was just us and the reporter's van across the street. 5 o'clock, I called to them. Personal items only. Everything else stays until the divorce settlement is finalized. Patricia marched over to me, her composure finally cracking completely. You vindictive little bitch. After everything we've done for you? Everything you've done for me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Patricia, you've spent 5 years trying to convince me I was worthless while living in my house, eating food I paid for, enjoying a lifestyle my inheritance made possible. The only vindictive thing I'm doing is refusing to let it continue. We gave you a family, she shrieked. We welcomed you into our home. My home, I corrected. And you didn't give me a family. You gave me a front row seat to watch you abuse someone you thought was powerless to fight back. Michael stepped between us. Mom, that's enough. We need to focus on damage control. Damage control? I pulled out my phone and started recording again. Michael, your mother just called me a vindictive bitch in front of a news van. I think the damage is already done. For the first time, Michael seemed to notice the reporter across the street. His face went ashen as he realized this was becoming a public spectacle. Turn off the camera, he said desperately. No, I said simply. You made this public when you served me divorce papers in front of 20 people. You made this public when you humiliated me at Thanksgiving dinner. You don't get to demand privacy now that the tables have turned. I walked toward my car, then paused and looked back at the three of them standing in the driveway of my mansion. The mansion they'd be vacating within a month. You know what the really ironic part is? I said. If you had just respected my art, supported my dreams, and treated me like an equal partner, we could have built something beautiful together. Instead, you chose to tear me down while secretly profiting from my success. So now you get to find out what life looks like without me subsidizing it. I drove away feeling lighter than I had in years. In my rearview mirror, I watched Patricia screaming at Michael while David tried to calm them both down. The reporter's van was already moving toward them, probably sensing an opportunity for follow-up interviews. The gallery meeting with Sarah went better than I could have imagined. Within an hour, we'd planned not just the exhibition, but a complete coming-out strategy for my career. No more pseudonyms, no more hidden sales, no more downplaying my success to make other people comfortable. The story is incredible, Sarah said, reviewing the notes she'd taken. Successful artist discovers she's been financially abused by family who mocked her work while profiting from it. Then, she reclaims her power and her fortune in one dramatic confrontation. Rebecca, this is the kind of narrative that makes careers. I don't want to exploit what happened, I said carefully. You're not exploiting it, you're owning it. There are thousands of women out there living with partners or families who undermine their dreams while benefiting from their success. Your story gives them permission to fight back. That afternoon, I moved into a stunning loft in the Arts District downtown. Unlike the mansion, which had been beautiful but never truly felt like mine, this space immediately felt like home. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the open layout with natural light, and I could already envision where my easel would go, where I'd display my growing collection of work. The best part? Every square foot was mine, paid for with money I'd earned through my own talent and hard work. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls and texts. Some were from Michael and his family, ranging from angry demands to pathetic attempts at reconciliation. But others were from friends I hadn't spoken to in months, people who'd seen the news coverage or heard through the grapevine about what had happened. Rebecca? It's Emma. My college roommate's voice was warm with concern. I just saw the news story. Honey, I'm so proud of you for finally standing up to those awful people. Emma had met Michael and his family a few times over the years, and she'd never liked them. They always made you seem smaller, she'd told me once. Like you were apologizing for taking up space. I should have listened to you years ago, I admitted. You listened when you were ready. That's what matters. How are you feeling? Free, I said and meant it. For the first time in 5 years, I feel completely free. The news story broke on local television that evening. I watched from my new loft as a reporter stood in front of my mansion, interviewing neighbors about the dramatic Thanksgiving confrontation that exposed years of financial fraud and emotional abuse. They'd managed to get a statement from Mrs. Wellington, who'd apparently been more observant at dinner than I'd realized. "The family was extremely cruel to that young woman," she told the reporter. "The way they mocked her art career, the public humiliation with those divorce papers, it was appalling behavior. And now to find out she was supporting them all along, it's like something out of a movie." The reporter had also caught up with Patricia and Michael outside a lawyer's office. Patricia looked haggard and refused to comment, but Michael tried to spin the story. "This is a private family matter that's been blown out of proportion," he said. "My wife is going through a difficult time and making accusations that simply aren't true." The reporter's follow-up question was devastating. "Mr. Anderson, public records show that your wife is the sole owner of the family home and inherited a substantial trust fund 5 years ago. How do you respond to allegations that you hid this information from her?" Michael's stammering non-answer spoke volumes. The story went viral on social media overnight. Suck. Thanksgiving revenge started trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of family financial abuse or creative dreams that had been dismissed by loved ones. Sarah called me early the next morning, barely able to contain her excitement. "Rebecca, you need to see this. The gallery's website crashed from traffic overnight. We've had inquiries from collectors in New York, Los Angeles, even London. People want to buy your work specifically because of your story." That's incredible. It gets better. I've had 3 different publishers call about book deals, 2 production companies interested in your story, and Martha Stewart's people want to feature you in an upcoming issue about women entrepreneurs. Martha Stewart. I had to sit down. "There's more," Sarah continued. "The Museum of Contemporary Art wants to discuss a retrospective exhibition. Rebecca, in 24 hours you've gone from hiding your success to becoming one of the most talked about artists in the country." Meanwhile, my phone was still buzzing with calls from Michael and his family. I'd stopped answering them, but the voicemails were becoming increasingly desperate. "Rebecca, please, we can work this out," Michael's latest message said. "I know I made mistakes, but we love each other. We can go to counseling, figure this out together." Love. He was talking about love now, after 5 years of making me feel like a burden he had to carry. Patricia's messages were less conciliatory. "This vindictive behavior is beneath you. Think about what you're doing to this family. Think about your reputation." My reputation. As if having a reputation as someone who wouldn't tolerate abuse was somehow a bad thing. David's messages were the most telling. "Becca, Mom's having health problems from the stress. She can't handle losing the house. Can't you just be the bigger person here?" The bigger person. Always the bigger person. Always the one expected to absorb the damage, to make things easier for everyone else. I deleted all the messages and called Jennifer. "How are they responding to the counter petition?" I asked. "Panic mostly. They've hired a lawyer, but it's clear they can't afford anyone top tier. Their attorney has already called asking about settlement discussions." Settlement discussions? They want to negotiate. They're finally realizing they don't have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle against someone with your financial means. What kind of settlement are they proposing? Nothing formal yet, but the lawyer hinted that Michael would be willing to forego any claim to marital assets in exchange for reduced reimbursement demands. I considered this. The truth was, I didn't need the money. I had more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But this wasn't really about money anymore. "Jennifer, I want to propose a counteroffer." "I'm listening." "Full reimbursement for the misappropriated trust fund income. Every penny Michael diverted over 5 years. In exchange, I'll waive the damages for emotional distress and agree to an expedited divorce timeline." "That's more than fair. What about the house?" "They're out by the end of the month as originally planned. No negotiation on that point." "And if they refuse?" "Then we go to trial and let a judge decide. With my financial resources and their documented admission of fraud, I like our chances." The settlement offer was delivered that afternoon. By evening, Michael's lawyer had called back with acceptance. 2 weeks later, I stood in my mansion for the final time before putting it on the market. The space felt different now, not like a prison, but not quite like home either. It was beautiful, but it carried too many memories of feeling small, diminished, grateful for scraps. The new buyer was a young couple, both doctors, who'd seen the house online and fallen in love with it immediately. They had no idea about the drama that had played out within these walls, and I was glad for that. The house deserved a fresh start, just like I did. I kept only a few things: the art supplies for my studio, some books, and oddly enough, the Phoenix painting I'd tried to give the family that terrible Thanksgiving night. It had started as a symbol of resilience in general, but now it felt deeply personal, a portrait of my own resurrection. My new life was taking shape beautifully. The gallery exhibition, reclaimed Women Rising from the Ashes, opened to incredible reviews and sold-out crowds. 3 major museums had already expressed interest in acquiring pieces for their permanent collections. The book deal had come through, a memoir about recognizing and escaping financial abuse in relationships. The advance alone was enough to fund several smaller galleries that featured emerging women artists. But the most satisfying development was the scholarship program I'd established at my old art school. The Rebecca Martinez grant would provide full funding for women artists who'd been told their dreams weren't practical, who'd been made to feel grateful for the chance to create. Michael signed the final divorce papers on a cold Friday morning in January. I didn't attend the hearing. Jennifer handled everything while I was in my studio, working on a new series about transformation and self-discovery. When she called to tell me it was official, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. "How does it feel to be single again?" she asked. I looked around my sun-filled studio, at the canvases lining the walls, at the easel where my latest painting was taking shape. Through the windows, I could see the city below, full of possibilities and opportunities I was finally free to pursue. "It feels like I can breathe again," I said. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party in my loft. Emma was there, along with Sarah from the gallery, Jennifer, and a few new friends I'd made in the art community. We toasted with champagne, but it wasn't really a celebration of my divorce. It was a celebration of everything that came after. To Rebecca, Sarah raised her glass, who proved that the best revenge is not just living well, but living authentically. To second chances, Emma added, and the courage to take them. To knowing your worth, Jennifer said, and demanding that others recognize it too. I raised my own glass, looking around at these women who'd supported my journey back to myself. To freedom, I said simply, and to never again making yourself smaller to make others comfortable. As we sipped our champagne and talked about dreams and plans and possibilities, I caught my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, I looked like myself again, not diminished, not apologetic, not grateful for permission to exist. I looked powerful. The woman in that reflection had learned that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's self-destruction. She'd learned that people who truly love you don't ask you to hide your light to make them feel better about their own darkness. Most importantly, she'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to disappoint people who never should have had expectations of you in the first place. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Michael, written on cheap notebook paper in his familiar handwriting. "Rebecca," it began, "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I want you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. Living in a studio apartment, working 2 jobs to pay back the settlement money, has given me perspective I never had before. I realize now that I never really saw you, not the real you. I saw someone I could mold into what I thought a wife should be, someone who would be grateful for what I provided without questioning where it came from or what it cost. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to try to get you back. I'm writing because I want you to know that your art was never a joke. It was the most real thing about our entire relationship, and I was too insecure to admit that someone I was supposed to protect and provide for was actually more talented and successful than I'd ever be. I hope you're happy. I mean that. For the first time in my life, I hope someone else's happiness matters more than my own comfort. The person you've become, or maybe the person you always were that I couldn't see, deserves all the success and recognition you're getting. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to understand that. Michael. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Not because I was angry, but because that chapter of my life was closed. Michael's growth and self-awareness were his journey now, not mine. I had paintings to create, exhibitions to plan, and dreams to pursue without permission or apology. Standing in my studio that evening, working on a canvas that depicted a woman stepping out of shadows into brilliant light, I realized that the phoenix in my first painting had been prophetic. I hadn't just risen from the ashes of my old life, I had become the fire itself.